Blending modes are a great way to combine the pixels of two separate layers. Granted, they're not the most intuitive tools in Photoshop, but by getting a general understanding of how they work, we can get very creative with very little effort. Let's go to our Chapter 5 folder and open the file Blending Modes. Now there are a couple of things that I need to explain about blending modes. I just mentioned that they work by combining two individual layers. Really, they're combining a blend color with a base color. Now if you have two layers, as I do here in this Layers panel, the top layer is always the blend color, the bottom layer is the base color. Now you can also choose a blending mode for a brush, and in that instance, the brush will be the blend color and the layer on which you're painting will be the base color. Now I'm going to go here in the Layers panel and click so you can see our blending mode options. Now it's a very long list and this can be very overwhelming, which is why most people simply leave blending modes alone, but we're going to break it down into manageable chunks. The first thing to notice here is that the blending modes are separated into groups, and that's not by accident. We're going to skip normal and dissolve for a moment, but I want to talk about this group that starts here with darken. We've got darken, multiply, color burn, linear burn, and darker color. These are your darkening blending modes, meaning that if you select any of these, your result will be a darker image. Those are followed by your lightening group. Choosing any of these will result in a lighter image. You should know that in the darken group, every single element there has its opposite function in the lightening group. So darken is the opposite of lighten, multiply is the opposite of screen, color burn, color dodge are opposites, same with linear burn, linear dodge, and then darker color and lighter color. Following that, we have what's called a contrast group. Now these blending modes are capable of both darkening and lightening an image in different areas, so they're adjusting contrast. Followed by that, we have the comparative modes. To be honest, these are probably used the least amount of any of the blending modes. Typically, they involve some kind of inverting of colors. And finally, we have blending modes that affect hue, saturation, color, and luminosity. We'll talk about luminosity later on in this lesson, but again, the idea here is to know that you don't have to memorize what each effect does. Just simply keep in mind that if you want a lighter result, you're going to start choosing from this lightening group. If you want to change contrast, you can go to this group here. So that's going to help us get a basic handle on when we would use a particular blending mode. I'm going to go and set this back to normal. Now in our normal mode, which is the default in Photoshop, the blend color overrides the base color, unless you change opacity. Certainly if we click here on opacity and we drag to the left, we can change how these two layers blend together, but at 100% you will always see your blend color. Dissolve gives you sort of a random effect here, and there's a great shortcut that I'll give you now. Underneath normal we have dissolve. Now this involves a random blending of the two layers, and again, to see it we really need to have the opacity turned down. So if we do that, you can see how it's sort of randomly letting one layer come through over another. I'm going to set the opacity here back to 100. Now moving through this list of blending modes can be done with a shortcut. If you want to move down the blending modes list, you press Shift-Alt+, or Shift-Command+ on a Mac. If you want to move up the list instead, you can hold Shift-Alt- or Shift-Command- if you're on a Mac. So let's simply scroll down to the next option here. Now we have our darken mode. Now darken is interesting because what it does is compare the pixels of the blend color and the base color, and whichever one is darker is allowed to show through completely. So you can see here in the body of this lion, the blend color is darker, this little rock texture that we have, so that's being allowed to show through. But over here in the sky from the base color is darker, so that's going to be allowed to show through. And let's just continue scrolling through with Shift-Alt+, Shift-Option+ if you're on a Mac. Multiply gives us a blending here of the two options. We're still darkening the image. Color burn is even more extreme, linear burn, and we get to darker color. Now we're moving to our lighten group. We've got screen, color dodge, linear dodge, lighter color, and now we're getting to probably the most useful group that you'll find, the contrast group. Now if we have overlay selected here, we can see that the blend color is mixing nicely with the base color. And if we go and reduce opacity here, bring this down somewhere around maybe 70% or so, now you really get a good sense of how these layers are starting to blend together. What we want to do with this image is create an effect where the lion looks like he's actually carved out of a very rough rock texture. Now by setting overlay to an opacity of 69%, we're in the general ballpark, but I'm going to show you how to make it even more believable. Remember, we've got a wide option of blending modes to choose from, so if I go and choose a different blending mode, let's try soft light. Here you can see we have a much more realistic effect. Now you'll notice if you look closely, and I'll zoom in here, Control plus on Windows, Command plus on a Mac. Notice that while this rock texture looks great over the lion, it's also spilling out into other areas of the image where we don't want this texture to be visible. Now this calls into effect a great feature of blending modes, and that is this. The majority of blending modes have what's called a neutral color. A neutral color is a color that prevents the blending from taking place. Now we're in soft light, which is part of the contrast group, and the neutral color for the contrast group is gray, middle gray. Wherever there are areas of middle gray in the blend color, the effect will not take place. And let's see how we can use that to our advantage. I'm going to go here to my color swatch here on the foreground color and double click it. And what I want to do is change the color from black to middle gray. So you can see that by default, the red value is selected in this dialog. I'm going to type in 128 for red, hit the tab key, 128 for green, tab again, and 128 for blue. That's going to give me an exact middle gray. I'll hit OK. Now what we'll do is select a brush. B is the shortcut for brush. And let's see, maybe bring this brush size down just a hair. Now what I'm going to do is paint directly on the blend color layer, and I'm painting with middle gray, and watch what's going to happen. Notice that everywhere I'm painting with gray is preventing this soft light blend from taking effect. So if I simply go in here and paint around the outside of this statue, I can get rid of that blending effect and prevent it from occurring. If I go over here to this section, you can see how that's taking out this blend color here. And we'll go down to the bottom. It's great that the rock texture is showing through here, but we don't want it to affect this marble here. We want the marble to look like marble. And we can simply paint and take this out. Get this little corner here. And one more area here should do it. And I'm going to zoom out a bit here by hitting Control 0 on Windows, Command 0 on a Mac. And now you can see that we've allowed this texture to show through on the lion, but we've prevented it from happening anywhere in the background of this image. And if I turn off my base color here, you can see that I've actually painted in with gray. I'll set this opacity to 100% so you can see it much better. Here are all the areas where I've painted with gray, and that color is the neutral color for soft light, preventing the effect from taking place. Now I want to talk about another useful way that you can apply blending modes. I'm going to turn blend color off and select our base color layer. I'm going to make an adjustment layer. Now it doesn't matter which one we use because I'm not going to make an edit to it. In this case I think I'll just choose curves here, a curves adjustment layer. Now with no edit, of course, there's no change to the image. But watch what happens if I change the blending mode here. So if I click and go to multiply, for example, which is in the darkening group, notice that even with an empty adjustment layer, I have built up density in this image. I've darkened it simply because I set the blending mode to one of the darkening groups, in this case multiply. I could have just as easily chosen a blending mode from the lightening group, something like screen for example, and lightened the image. This can be handy if you need a quick down and dirty way to build up contrast in an image. And of course we can adjust the opacity here. So if 100% looks too strong, I can come down here 49% and I'll toggle the visibility off and on. Here's our original, and here is what we get with an empty adjustment layer. This could have been a curves layer, a levels adjustment layer, photo filter. It doesn't matter because we're not actually editing it. We're simply changing the blending mode. Now, as I just mentioned, you could have chosen another blending mode. Let's go up here and choose a lightning mode. Let's choose screen, for example, and you can see how that brightens up the image. I'll toggle the visibility off. There's our original, and there's with our blending mode set to screen. Now let's go and set this back to normal. I want to show you one last feature here of blending modes. Now with our curves layer, this time we are going to adjust the curve. So I'm going to click my On Image Adjustment tool, and what I'm looking to do is simply add contrast to this image. I'm going to click here in a darker area and drag down, and I'll click over here in this cloud because that's a brighter area, and I'll drag up. So what we've got is an S-curve shape that increases the contrast of the image, but notice if I toggle the visibility icon off and on, it's not just the contrast that's increased, the saturation has increased. Now this is a characteristic of the Curves tool. When you go into Curves and make some pixels brighter and others darker, you're affecting contrast. But Photoshop is set up so that it will also tweak the saturation for you. So if you boost contrast, many times you'll see a saturation boost as well. Now, a large majority of the time, this is a desirable effect. If you're editing an image from scratch and it's dull, low contrasty, when you boost contrast, many times a saturation boost can be a good thing. But there will be times when you want to limit a curves adjustment strictly and exclusively to brightness and contrast. If that's the case, you can simply go and change the blending mode. All the way down at the bottom, choose luminosity. And notice the difference here. Let me move the layers panel here, and we'll go to the history panel here. And this is the curve with a normal blending mode. You can see how the saturation is increased, particularly in the blue sky. And here is the when we set the blending mode to luminosity. We retain our contrast adjustment here, but without any change to the saturation.